Good
One second.
afternoon, and is everything good?
We are live now.
Okay, great. So we go?
Yes,
Good to
please.
go? Yes, okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to have you all from all around the world. I mean, from all the way from Brazil to the Philippines. So thank you so much for joining early in the morning, late in the evening, and it's a real pleasure to have you all with us for this webinar on the power of the public, rebuilding trust through quality and resilient public services for social development. So my name is Min Jong Kim, and I'm the Director for Education 2030 here at UNESCO. And as we prepare for the Second World Summit for Social Development in Doha, today we're bringing together UN agencies, member states, and public service stakeholders to reflect on how we can place quality, inclusive, and resilient public services at the heart of global development efforts. Public services are really at the backbone of our societies, and when they are accessible and efficient, they can also promote social justice, equality, human rights, and sustainable development. So our aim today is really to build a shared vision and stronger advocacy for how public services can truly serve people. And so just a few practical notes before we begin. There is interpretation available in French and English, and you can select your language by clicking the interpretation button on Zoom. And please do share your questions in the chat. And the speakers will address them at the end of each session. So we will begin with an opening address by Ms. Stefania Giannini, UNESCO's Assistant Director General for Education. And she will be followed by a keynote speech from His Excellency, Mr. Francisco Gaetani, Extraordinary Secretary for State Transformation at Brazil's Ministry of Management and Innovation in Public Services. Well, Mr. Gaetani has also already told us not to address him as His Excellency, but nevertheless, we are delighted that he's able to join us today. So we'll then move on into two key sessions, and this is really also the meat of today's webinar. So the first segment will be on public service professions and how we can make them more attractive to young talents. And the second segment will deliberate on making public services more responsive to the needs of people. And so without losing any time and to really get into the interesting part of all this, I would like to ask Ms. Stefania Giannini, Assistant Director General for Education, to give her opening remarks. Over to you, Stefania.
Thank you so much, Min. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to join you for this important conversation on the power of public, organized, as we all know, in the lead up to the Second World Summit for Social Development. And let me start by warmly thanking our partners, the International Labour Organization and the SDG4 Youth and Student Network, for joining forces with us, with UNESCO, and all of you, of course, participants, for being part of this important exchange. I wish also to thank particularly and warmly the Secretary of State for Transformation of Brazil, Mr. Francisco Gaetani. Muito bom dia, and welcome to the webinar as well. Well, the world today is facing, as we all know, multiple interconnected challenges, from increasing number of conflicts, climate change, the technological disruption, so to say, and most importantly, economic uncertainty. In this complex and fast-changing landscape, people everywhere are calling for institutions to truly serve them. And we see it in the growing number of movements, demonstrations around the world, often led by young people, of course, demanding a fairer, more just, and more sustainable world. And in all of these, public services are essential. Education, health, sanitation, and care systems are the bedrock of social cohesion. And when they fail or when they exclude, they kind of erode confidence and widen divides. when they are inclusive and when they are efficient, they strengthen trust and social cohesion. That's why among all public services, we want to have a special focus on education as both a human right and the public good, the common public good, that the governments have a moral responsibility, a duty to guarantee. Education, as you all know, empowers individuals, strengthens communities, and lays the foundation for social development and resilience of society at large. A recent analysis by UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report found that nearly 9 in 10 people today believe education should be primarily public and must call for greater public investment. This reflects a shared conviction that education is a collective investment in our common future and a shared responsibility. Meeting this expectation, as we all know, means investing not only in infrastructure and innovation, but above all, investing in people, which is, I suppose, one of the main topics to be addressed in the panel today. And this means investing also in teachers, who are the backbone of every education system, agent for change, if they are supported as they should be. We know, however, that the world currently faces a shortage of 44 million teachers to reach quality inclusive education by 2030, SDG 4. And making teaching an attractive and respected profession is essential now. And this means what? This means fair pay, decent working conditions, and opportunity for growth, both individually and as a professional constituency. It also means, let's say, rethinking radically, recasting somehow teaching as a collaborative profession. And this is especially important for recruiting and retaining young people, which is not the case we see in almost all regions and countries of the world. Well, these priorities were reaffirmed recently during the World Teachers' Day and the World Teachers Summit in Santiago, the very first of this kind at global level, earlier this year, hosted by Chile in Santiago and very much led by the high-level steering committee of SDG 4. Well, addressing the teacher shortage will require significant resources, an estimated $120 billion US dollars by 2030. And this calls for rethinking also how education is financed. Today, many countries spend more on debt servicing than on education or healthcare. And this is not the right direction to go, of course. To help address this problem, UNESCO is developing research and guidance on debt sustainability and debt for education swaps to support governments, countries in, let's say, reorientating, redirecting resources towards classrooms, towards students and teachers, towards the future, I would say. As we move toward the Second World Summit for Social Development, I invite all of you to join UNESCO in speaking with one voice on this important topic. The forthcoming Doha Political Declaration calls, as we all know, for a renewed commitment to social justice, to inclusion, and investment in people. And this means very much, first of all, investment in education, in decent work, and in quality public service at large that leave no one behind, really. Well, rebuilding trust. Trust is a key word, whatever we do, politics, geopolitics, economics, human relationship. And now trust begins with strong, equitable, and resilient public services, with all those who deliver them every day with dedication and purpose. I thank you very much, and I wish you a very productive conversation and dialogue ahead of the important summit in Doha next month. Thank you so much. Over to you, Min.
Thank you very much, Stefania. And now I would like to turn to Mr. Gaetani for his keynote address. Over to you.
Obviously, I was muting, sorry. Thank you very much for this opportunity. On behalf of Minister Esther Dweck, it's an honor and a privilege to talk to such distinguished audience. I have to say that I'm a little bit intimidated by this group. This is not my presentation. I hope we'll find the right one soon. But anyway, I will begin given the time. I think we have to be as short as possible, give your program. The first point I'd like to mention is that the current government, Lula is his first mandate. In the first days of his mandate, he faced an attempt of coup d'etat. We had a sort of capital movement here, and the buildings of the presidency, the Supreme Court, and of the Congress were destroyed by a mob supported by the ex-president who has currently who is responding to justice and has been condemned and probably will not be able to dispute the next election. What's important about why am I mentioning this? Because the task today of our president, as well as in many other countries, is to heal a divided country. And the first years, he was running against the markets, who bet against the government as usual. And he faced three distinguished challenges. First, rebuilding. Second, building differently. Third, build for the first time, because we are facing some challenges for the first time. This is a picture of the inauguration day, and the president was taking over the presidency with the support of many social movements, many social groups, and this picture captures the moment. Next, please. The point I'd like to make, just for the start, is that most of our countries, they don't know who they are anymore. Some Ipsos research that have been performed annually, they show that there's a cognitive, next please, there's a cognitive dissonance problem. If you look to the research, the countries don't know exactly how are their customs, how are their values, how are their priorities. And this problem of a cognitive dissonance makes harder elections, choices, and governing. Next. If you usually go to any country, public opinion will be critical about the civil services, the public services. When they work, they are invisible. And the digital transition has been also traumatic in many ways, because you have to provide public service for multiple audiences simultaneously. Obviously, we all feel irritated with bureaucracy, excessive red tape, and in many countries, we have not been able to overcome the trade-off between accountability and efficiency, which has led to paralysis in many different governments. Practically in all governments today, public services are underfunded, especially in education and health. And in order to make things worse, we have corruption, inefficiency, and waste published every day in the media, which contributes to demoralize the governments. If you look to some research, they will show to, next please, they show that trust, it's a problem, and it's a problem associated with inequality, and trust in government and trust in people. The countries where you have trust are the developed countries. And even in these countries today, this trust is declining. Next. Building trust is very challenging. It depends on time. It involves brand, charisma, family, neighborhood, political parties, churches, academia, press, curators, habits, peers, social networks, bubbles. Next. But the main point I'd like to emphasize is time, because reason needs time to function. And today we joke here that governments are now an Instagram operation. Is it Instagrammable? That's a key question in government. It's a question of moment, instant. That's not how trust works. Credibility needs time to be built. Consistency needs time to be established. Democracy needs time to be consolidated. Change needs time to take place. Institutional building needs time to occur. Development needs time to be structured. And building trust needs time to be acquired. This point is relevant because we are living in a society today where we have to establish our priorities. In our government, Minister Sterdweck, next please, has emphasized that we should prioritize people and technology. If you want resilience, innovative, and inclusive public services, we have to avoid an underpaid, overworked, and precarious workforce. That's why our ministry has prioritized people through resuming public selections, providing pay rises, and technology. We're trying to deliver the government at the hand of each citizen via digital services and improving our procurement capacities. Next, when we talk about institutions, if institutions matter, then their organization matters because their modus operandi depends on its governance structures and mechanisms. This sounds a kind of 20th century conversation. It's hard to move on within this sort of framework. Next, institutional capacity for developed effectiveness depends on people, high officials, bureaucrats, banks, analysts, etc. that don't know it, and people don't know exactly what this expression means. The implementation world isn't a priority for economic teams. They don't have neither a narrative nor an excuse to deal with it. They aren't shared diagnosis about institutional deficits that need to be tackled in order to focus on strategic sequence priorities. Digital transformation, which includes obviously AI, may help, but it doesn't replace handling complexity at implementation level. Sustainable institutional capacities are uncharted water, and in times of turbulence, volatility, and intensification of redistributive conflicts. And that's the reality we're facing now. Next, I mentioned here very briefly, we recurrently underestimate how serious the critique of bureaucracy by some theoretical and ideological streams are popular. Public choice critique of bureaucracy is revealing, is showing, is selling the idea that bureaucrats are self-service, rent-seeking, and budget maximizer. And the only possible answer that we can provide is delivery. We have to show that we are able to make public sector work in making the bureaucracy serve the people, which is not an easy challenge. Next, in the case of Brazil, we have some good examples that are helping us to rescue public sector credibility. The response to COVID, despite the national government negationist attitudes, was a good example. We organized a national data system with the press, with civil society, independent of the federal government. Our national health system is another good example. We just had a very interesting case. The British ambassador, she was able to have a liver transplant in our national health system in emergency circumstance. And she was impressed because she didn't pay anything and she was shocked by how Brazil could provide this sort of service. PIX, many of you have heard about it, an innovation in terms of payment for payments that is much more fast, resilient, simple, and credible, that now it's threatening some American companies, which has been object of Trump's attention. Embrapa, our agriculture research state-owned enterprise, it's a powerhouse of the performance of our system. Family Grant, which was established initially by Lula in his first mandate, survived the dark years of Temer and Bolsonaro, and it's still in place. And more recently, we had some extreme events, some disastrous floods in Rio Grande do Sul, and the state was able to respond quickly, despite a lot of improvisation, but it was able to provide services to the affected population immediately. Next. I'm just mentioning here very briefly, if you have access to OECD reports about innovations. Innovation is key to face all these challenges. We have several modes of innovations today, directed, that face uncertainty, and adaptive, that deals with incrementalism. This is the way ahead. We think that it can provide, I would say, cost-effective initiatives and a repertoire of models of achieving what we have to look for at the public sector. Next, there's a Nesta Congo from Britain was designing this cloud of each point of this cloud is a methodology, is a framework, is an approach to public sector or even private sector policy change. And here you have today a repertoire of initiatives that we can choose. So it's not a matter of lack of solutions, of lack of methodologies. It's a matter of organizing the how. Next. We did some reforms, reports here, some of them trying to design what should be the shape of our next generation of civil servants. We're still working on these things, and we hope to be able to refresh the kind of 19th century approach to bureaucracy, usually very traditional, very Weberian, somehow unavoidable, but which that needs to change. Some features of current bureaucracy, like being entrepreneurial, being curious, being insurgent, they don't fit in the traditional mode of bureaucracy that we have studied in the past. Next. We are trying to search for solutions in the future. We realized two big events next year and this year, States of the Future, exploring what could be our future. We need a vision. We need to understand where we're heading to. Otherwise, we'll get trapped by our current conflicts. We worked with CLAD in Latin America, producing some reports involving the state, democracy, and inequality. Why? Because if the state doesn't work properly, democracy does not hold and inequality grows. We are working with NDP. We're just producing now a report on the signal spotlights in Brazil, trying to capture the signals of the future that are in the middle of this conversation. We're in the sort of interregnum between the past, which is living, and the future that is arriving. But meanwhile, we have to see how to work with this in this context. Also, we are trying to identify the cost of inaction regarding our biggest asset, which is the Amazon basin, which also because we have COP30 in the corner, and we want to provide a different approach to the way we discuss the sustainable policies. Next. The future ahead. We are trying to fight multilateralism in two fronts, in UN and regionally. I think that multilateralism has been traditionally a permanent challenge, but today it's an extreme situation. It's an existential threat, given what's happening in some countries related to their bet against solidarity and cooperation between nations. Long-term trade relations became crucial to any strategic economic partnership. And the identifications of the strategic areas to develop symbiotic international partnerships is essential. That's why we're trying to adopt a more proactive interdisciplinary posture abroad and nationally. Next. We're facing multiple transitions. I prefer the word transition than crisis. Crisis, we abuse the expression. We're facing energy transition, ecological transition, climate transition, demographic transitions, digital transitions, geopolitical transitions, food security, work, finance, and you have to deal with these transitions simultaneously. That's one of our major challenges. Next. And just to conclude, the attitude we're trying to adopt in Brazil, the posture we're trying to adopt, I'm recurring to Havel quotations about hope. It's not a hope as a passive attitude. It's something that we carry hope within us or not. And it's a sort of orientation, an ability to work with something because it's good and because we think it's worth it. Working for something that makes sense regardless of how it turns out. We're facing tragedies, extreme events in many places. And if we don't find the strength within ourselves, it's harder. And we have to find this strength in order to try again, try better. And that's the challenge we face today. And we hope to join the community of nations in this big effort, especially for UNESCO, which has been a very special partner to Brazil in the current circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gaetani, and for that very interesting but also inspiring keynote that really helps to kick off these discussions that we will be having during this webinar. And so with that, I would like to pass on the microphone to the two moderators of the upcoming segments. First of all, Marco Pasqualini, and then on to Oliver Liang. So over to you, Marco.
Thank you very much, Min, and good day to everyone. My name is Marco Pasqualini. I work at UNESCO in the education sector, and I'm very happy to moderate this first segment of our discussion on how can young people be recruited and retained in public service professions in education, health, and sanitation. Indeed, public services matter to people, as we just saw, and we need more and more efficient public services. And to do this, we need a qualified and talented workforce. But are young people interested in public services, and are these public service professions attractive? So we will try to respond to these questions with our panelists today, starting with Ms. Ethel Agnes Valenzuela, who is Commissioner on Higher Education in the Philippines. Dr. Luvuyo Bayeni, Chief Director of Human Resources at the National Department of Health in South Africa. Mr. Peter Eriksen Ringstad, Senior Advisor on Governance at NORAD. Mr. Jim Campbell, Director of the Health Workforce at the World Health Organization, and Ms. Antonia Wolf, Director of Research, Policy and Advocacy at Education International. But before we start, I'm pleased to give the floor to Ellen Dixon for a framing by youth. Ellen represents youth and students in the leaders group of the SDG 4 High-Level Steering Committee, which is the global apex body for decision-making in education. And today she will present the results of a survey done by the SDG 4 Youth and Student Network, a network of young education experts and leaders in education hosted by UNESCO. Over to you, Ellen.
Thank you kindly, Marco. It is a pleasure to join this event on the behalf of young people across the globe to really open an important stakeholder discussion on the public services in relation to young people ahead of the World Summit on Social Development. The SDG 4 Youth and Student Network would like to take this opportunity to thank the ADG of Education at UNESCO, Ms. Giannini, and to His Excellency Gatani, and all of those who have been involved to make this conversation possible. The ILO reported in 2024 that the age distribution of public sector workers is relatively similar to that of the private sector, except when it comes to those aged between 16 to 24 years. They make up only 6% of the public sector employment across the world in comparison to 16% of the private sector. The network, in partnership with the All Africa Students Union, AMP Global Youth, the Global Student Forum, the International Student One Health Alliance, Incision, the Learning Planet Institute, SOS International, the World Youth Parliament for Water, and UNESCO ILSAC, have led in the creation of a global survey regarding youth perspectives of the attractiveness of the public service sector. The survey was inspired by existing surveys, including the Global Survey on Public Servants and the AMP Global Youth Survey, and it is in alignment with standards such as the ISCED. While the survey is still live and we encourage you to share it, hopefully that will be shared in the chat function with you so you can get the link. We're here today to share some of the preliminary findings with you. So hopefully we can head to the demographics, which should be on the next slide. Currently, we have an overwhelming response from the Global South, with the two highest regional contributions being Africa at 56.7% and Asia Pacific at 25.9% of responses. The majority of respondents were aged between 21 to 30 years of age, with 43% of respondents being female. The respondents were overwhelmingly from higher education, with 53.1% stating that their highest level of achievement was a bachelor's and 23.4% in either a master's or a doctorate. Key vulnerable communities currently represented included 26% marking they were from rural communities, 13.5% indicating they were disabled, while 14.2% stated they were Indigenous. We could take a look at the next, sorry, not the next slide, but the next image next to it on the sectors of interest. Of the three top public service sectors of interest, the highest was education, which you can see there at 62.3%, understandably, given that the survey was largely showcased and featured by UNESCO, which we are very grateful for. This was followed by healthcare at 30.7% and environment at 29.6%. In these initial stages of these preliminary findings, I would suspect that these top three, as opposed to some of the others you can see there, such as transportation and water and waste management, is due to the level of visibility of these particular areas of interest and work in regards to higher education spaces. So I think there's possibly a connection in terms of who our respondents are and why they were responding in that way. We're going to move on to the next slide, which is on factors. The top 4 attracting factors to the public services for respondents were opportunities to serve society and citizens at 50.6% and career development opportunities at 38.4%. Salary levels and benefits and job security also came in around about 25% each. Clearly, there is a lot of altruism within young people. We are already aware of this, but it very much came through in terms of the factors that influence their engagement in the public services. If we go to the next slide, we will see some of the barriers. And in terms of the barriers, the top 4 included too much political influence at 50.25% and limited career growth opportunities at 46.3%, with statistically similar slow or complex recruitment processes, and salaries are too low compared to private sector from 20 to 35%. We've noticed that these two graphs sort of mirror each other in responses a little bit in terms of the priorities for young people, focusing on social issues being that paramount motivating factor, and secondarily employment processes and salaries. If we move on to the next section, you'll see some of our like-it questions that we put forward. The key questions that we were asking there were to kind of get a little bit of a litmus test as to feeling around public services. The potential for social change and education and preparedness showed the highest levels of support in terms of young people feeling prepared to enter the public services, with 86% for the former and 79% for the latter, marking yes or absolutely of perceived role influence and preparedness. 73% marked yes or absolutely when looking for jobs in the public service sector in terms of job attractiveness. Would they go and look for a job in the public services? But in contrast, youth belief in intergenerationalism in the public services was lower than 54% at yes or absolutely. We had some quotes that we also collected from young people, which I'm going to briefly share here. They are very similar to the early messages of hope that were shared. A young person from Thailand stated, "When government is seen as inclusive and representative of younger generations, it helps restore public confidence. Young civil servants also serve as bridges between government and local communities, ensuring that policies are not only well designed, but also effectively communicated and implemented at the grassroots level." Another young person from Uganda stated, "Public service is the backbone of a functioning and equitable society. When young people engage in this sector, the rewards are not only personal, but also deeply social. Their participation strengthens democratic institutions, modernizes public systems, and ensures that future generations are actively shaping the world that they will inherit." In these types of quotes, we can identify that youth uphold the need for confidence in the public services, the intergenerational power of youth in governance, and the social influence of the public services going forward. Thank you for this opportunity to present. The full findings for the survey will be made available in November following WCSD. We hope these statistics will serve as a useful conversation starter, so to speak, for the forthcoming conversation that will happen on young people in the public services from other stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And indeed, these preliminary results are quite interesting, and they will really allow us to start digging deeper into the topic, starting with Ms. Ethel Agnes Valenzuela, Commissioner for Higher Education in the Philippines. Ethel Agnes, we just heard of the interest of young people in the education sector specifically. However, as we heard from the ADG Giannini, the challenges are serious when it comes to addressing the global teacher shortage. So how is the Philippines addressing the matter of the teacher workforce? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening from the Philippines, and good morning, everybody who is coming from Europe. And I'm very happy to join you in this conversation on how can we recruit young people and how can we retain them in public service professions. And I was invited to talk about the education in particular. As a Commissioner of Higher Education, I would like to share with you some important information on the status of our recruitment of young professionals. First of all, we know from the presentation of ADG that Really, the world needs young people. And for education, we need at least roughly 69 million new teachers to meet the requirements of Education 2030. And with this, think about that. It's really a huge number. The staggering figure is the size of infrastructure gap that separates the world we want from the world we are building. And globally experienced, talented educators are actually leaving the profession faster than the new graduates are entering into this. This is more of a staffing issue, I think. And for the Philippines, we have an oversupply perhaps of teacher educators. But the question is that how do we retain them? How do we build a sustainable global strategy and internally to recruit and crucially to retain them as the next generation of dedicated teachers? So in the Philippines, we have established our Teacher Education Council. We're reviewing all the policies. And you see, before they can enter the teaching profession, they should be licensed. They should take the examination. And once they pass that, they can enter into the profession. But young professionals today, young teachers, are seeking careers of purpose and meaning. It's not just anything they graduated, but they elevated this into more passion, elevating teaching as strategic as occupation and elevating it as a profound social consequence and a national mission. Remember the last mile learners, they're spread all over 7,400 islands, and they need to dedicate their life reaching the most marginalized sectors in our country. So recruitment must transition from really recognizing them and of course promoting them. This means building a clearer teacher leadership pipelines and aspiring leadership academies. They can show the storytelling and the pictures of teachers spread out in rural areas. But how can we make teaching the preferred entry point for talented university graduates? So particularly in STEM, in literacy, and the technological courses. For us here in the Philippines, the biggest barrier perhaps is retention because there is a strong magnet attracting them to teach outside of the country. So that's why it's very crucial for us to address the structural compensation deficits. Our teacher education graduates and young professionals, they are spread out in the ASEAN region or even in Asia Pacific in the Middle East. For us at the government, we must prioritize financial stability. First, on equity lever, guaranteed compensation and comprehensive benefits. That is more attractive perhaps so that they can stay. Our policy should ensure more equitable remuneration and consistent professional resource allotments. We need clear career ladders. That's what we're working right now with the Teacher Education Council. We must introduce retention incentives, very clear, merit-based progression system that ensure teaching is a lucrative lifetime career. So we can keep the young people here and not merely transitioning to teach and go outside of the country. We must address retention by restoring professional work environment. As you'd see, strong relationship-driven approach is needed. We need to empower teachers with comprehensive coaching, support mechanism, and this includes robust induction, onboarding programs, and of course, mentorship. So we also would like to focus on strengthening school leaderships. Some of the teachers, the young teachers, they leave because they're frustrated with their educational leaders, with their school principals. Therefore, we should also strengthen school leadership, creating a positive climate and culture where educational administrators provide informal support and actively listen to the teachers' voices. So the study on motivation and satisfaction, sometimes it's really the school environment they are in. Thus, for the Philippines, we must also address the administrative overload. Our teachers are not just teaching, they're also given administrative assignments. And for these non-instructional workload reduction is necessary. There are new policies coming out from our government, and some teachers are transitioning from contract of service, temporary assignments, to a more permanent, more protected status. So this avoids burnout, complaints, and they will look at teaching as really a rewarding career. The strength of our societies and economies rests on the quality of our education system. That's why now 38 major reform programs are being pushed forward to attract, to retain, and reward our teachers by activating the levers of equity, recognition, support, and enhanced leadership. We can really build a global teaching profession that is younger, stronger, and ready to meet the educational challenges of the 21st century. I'm very sorry I could not share my slides. I don't know for technical reasons, but I'm very sure that my sharing already captures the message I want to share with all of you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and congratulations to everyone who spent time knowing about the opportunities we can give to the young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ethel Agnes, for this very good testimony that you are bringing from the Philippines. And remaining in education, I would like to turn now to Antonia. Antonia, you are the voice of teachers today, and we heard about some of the measures that are being undertaken in the Philippines, where one of the big challenges is also the retention of teachers, as we just heard. Antonia, Education International represents teacher unions from all over the world. What is the global situation and what is needed to attract and retain young professionals in education?
Thanks so much, Marco, and greetings to you all. It's great to be here because that's been mentioned already. Public services, that is the backbone, as the Ugandan respondent in the youth survey had said. It's also a precondition for dignity, for rights, really building blocks for democratic societies. And at the same time, public services are heavily underfunded across the globe and have been for a long time in many places. What we work with as a Global Federation of Education Workers is the so-called global shortage of teachers at the moment. It's one of our priorities, unfortunately. This is in part because of the many teachers who choose to leave the profession. It's in part because the many young people who decide that teaching is not a career that they want to choose. However, it's not only a shortage of teachers, but there's also a shortage of positions, to use the language of the Global Education Monitoring Report, and I'll come back to that in a little while. But if just briefly stopping at the factors that make teachers leave the profession, that make young people think, oof, this is not a sector that I want to go into. And really thanks to Ethel, because I think Ethel painted a wonderful picture of some of the challenges and some of the solutions that you've found in the Philippines. What you could say on the basis of our global status survey is that teachers are underpaid, undervalued, and overworked. So we know that teachers are comparatively paid lower than colleagues in other sectors with the same qualifications. This could also be framed as teachers being penalized for going into the teaching profession. At the same time, we are seeing a high workload, very high levels of stress, a number of competing demands, and very few support structures. And in fact, these support structures are also diminishing over time as governments are cutting their public education budgets. What we saw in the recent TALIS survey that the OECD published just last week is that about a fifth of teachers work in schools where the quality of education cannot be assured due to a shortage of teachers. We also saw that about 30% of teachers reported a lack of support services and colleagues in different support functions. So that means that teachers are left juggling an increasing number of demands with a diminishing number of support structures. And in practice, what it means is that teachers are not able to teach in accordance with their professional ethics and their professional standards because the conditions are not there. And this is a really serious situation that people end up leaving a profession they've chosen, oftentimes exactly because of the power of public education systems to make the world a little bit better. And what I'd like to end on is the money, because as I said at the start, on the one hand, we have a situation where there is a shortage of teachers, that is individuals who are willing to work as teachers. On the other hand, we have a situation where in large parts of the global south, there are individuals who would like to work as teachers, who are qualified to work as teachers, but who are not able to do so because the public education budget doesn't allow for sufficient positions to be opened up. This is about austerity. Austerity, let me be very clear, is not a phenomenon of the global south only. But in the global south, we also have the added complication of public sector wage bill constraints. And I think we need to be really clear on this. At the moment, it's virtually impossible for governments in the global south to increase their public education budgets and to remain in line with a range of IMF targets. I think we need to talk about this. I think we need to look at the extent to which we are able to deliver on this promise of quality education for all, of a qualified teacher for all students across the globe. So what can be done? One, we need to ring fence social spending. And we need to be able to do that despite new NATO targets for defense. We need to be able to do that despite debt obligations. So a serious commitment to increasing education budgets and investing in the teaching profession. As part of that, and that's the second piece here, and that really ties back to what Ete was talking about, we need to invest in the teaching profession and ensure that they have the time, the tools, and the trust to do their job. That means investing in continuous professional development, in a range of support structures, including mentoring and other targeted measures for those who have just become teachers. And we need to look at career development and school leadership, as Ethel also pointed out. And then finally, I think we need to be better at involving the workforce in public policy making. And this was another thing that actually came out really clearly in the TALIS data that was published by the OECD last week. Being respected enough as a professional to have a say, not only in school level decision making, but in policy development more broadly, is a big part of job satisfaction. And I would argue that's also something that would help us enhance the status of the profession, because then teachers is not something that is just talked about by non-teachers, but it's something that is talked about with teachers, by teachers, and where we together can work to improve conditions. Thanks.
Thanks a million, Antonia. And good that you mentioned about the financing part, because we will get to that at the end of this session with Peter that I see on the screen. We will now move to another sector, which is the health sector, and I would like to turn to Dr. Bayeni. Dr. Bayeni, you are the Chief Director of Human Resources at the National Department of Health in South Africa. Are you facing similar challenges as the ones that we just heard in the domain of health? What are the differences, and what is your country doing in this regard? Over to you, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the colleagues that have also paved the way, especially when it comes to issues that affect public sector in general. I must say that indeed public sector issues cut across, irrespective of which sector you belong in. Antonio went to town with issues of remuneration, issues of the funding. So those are issues that cut across in terms of the public sector disciplines or departments. But maybe let me also allude to the fact that in terms of the health space and the health workforce, we can confirm that even in terms of looking at the trends in the last 10 years, I think as reported by WHO as well, we might have seen an increase in terms of the health workforce of about 26% in the period that is for the last 10 years. However, we can confirm that even that reflection has been a bit skewed in terms of where is it distributed, where you'll find some areas it will be one person for 64 patients, the others will be one for 621 patients. So indeed, as much as there's increase in number, but there is a challenge with certain areas as to how do we recruit and make sure that we increase the workforce. And obviously, when we talk about increasing the workforce, we are looking at the younger generation in terms of that space. But also what we need to be able to do, especially as we attempt and make an effort to attract younger generation into public service. I think for me, the first thing is also about making them understand what is public service all about. What is the inherent purpose of us being in public service and advocating for public service? Because at the end of the day, a majority of our citizens, irrespective of where you might be at, would then be depending on a public health system or in public service for that matter. So that's one of the issues that we need to probably inculcate with our younger generation even early on, to say, understand, yes, you might be in an affluent area yourself, or you might be a bit advantaged that you don't use public service. So you might not know these things, but the reality is that a bulk of our society and our citizens belong on public service. But also, I think maybe speaking from an experience of having been a public servant as a medical doctor, there is also what is being missed, which is what I refer to as a form of an internal reward, where as public servants, sometimes even as much as we work under strained conditions, but there are moments which are more than the down moments for that matter, where you go home and you feel like, in actual fact, if I was not at that point or at that service, maybe that public person that went there and got that help might not have received that help. So there is that internal reward that we need to be able to advocate and share with our younger generation. But of course, why do we need young people in the service? For me, it's also about ensuring that there is a population imaging or reflection, because as it stands now in South Africa, we're looking at about 60% of our population being a youthful population. So of course, it also helps to see that mirror imaging in the public sector, that there is young people in the public sector. But of course, we're of the opinion that they bring with innovation opportunities, that they will bring new ideas, bring energy and all that, which we need in the public sector. But I hope Antonio won't fight with me on this one, but it also becomes an expenditure control kind of an issue, because as it stands, the more you have an elder generation in the public sector, it becomes a bit costly in terms of maintaining them because they bring years of experience, they put more qualifications. So it does also help in terms of the expenditure controls when you would give an opportunity for younger generation. But of course, it also helps with mobility, especially where you would want to do equitable distribution of your workforce, trying to get them to areas where people don't necessarily go because they don't have those other reasons of saying family and all those things. So it's easy in terms of distribution as well as mobility thereof. How do we recruit and what can we do in terms of ensuring that we do that? The first thing is, of course, responding to the current challenges of the workforce, because if we can improve the working conditions of the working force now, address the issues of remuneration, as well as communicate the good things that the workforce is doing now, that will help with the public perception, because obviously people believe and get to be conditioned with what they see. So if the workforce public service are having unjust or are feeling that the conditions are not conducive, no one will be interested in going to work in the public sector. So if we can make sure that we change that part. But of course, in terms of access to higher education, because it's not enough for us to say they must come and work, but if there is constraints in terms of accessing higher education, yes, there are elements and opportunities in terms of bursary protection, where you would then offer intentionally so to say, these careers are for public service, and this is what we are offering in terms of recruitment. Come and study, we'll offer you bursaries. But importantly as well, we have not been doing what I refer to as an active talent search as public service. We just allow people to apply well as and when, but we don't intentionally go to universities, go and say, we see that you are even best at this and we want you to come and serve public service, even whilst they are still at school. So if we can then improve and do that active talent search, that will help a lot. But obviously, once they are in service, I think if we introduce early enough the issues of mentoring and coaching, role modeling, and allowing as well flexibility, because the times and the working conditions that were prescribed 20 years ago by the sector in terms of public service might not necessarily be ideal now. So we need to introduce such flexibilities of working hours and all those things that will be able to attract and retain the young ones. But also, they are young, so we need to be able to give them opportunities and room for career pathing where they would see themselves as being able to stay in public service but pursue whatever career opportunities they may want, ambitions they might have. So the issue of career pathing and guidance in terms of opportunities that are available in public service. So that's where I would stand and for now. But I can confirm that in terms of our healthcare system, we already have a system that we call under health in South Africa, internship and community service placement. So we are looking there at making sure that those who are qualifying, we make sure that we take them through public service and we secure and safeguard their posts. And on an annual basis, we place about between 4,000 to 5,000 of those that qualify. So that's one of the ways that we have currently with our system in terms of ensuring that they definitely go through public service, even if they may want to branch to public to private later on. But we ensure that at least the first 2 years of their post-qualification, they are exposed to public service. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Luvuyo Bayeni. Jim Campbell, you are director of the health workforce at the World Health Organization. So we heard about the situation in South Africa and what Dr. Bayeni is doing in his country. But what is the global situation about health professions? And what are some of the key measures that the sector can implement to attract and retain young talents? Over to you.
Thank you, Marco, and appreciation to Stefania and Yukiko, UNESCO and ILO for bringing us together, and for the participants here. It's great to see a multi-sectoral discussion on this issue. We are looking at a common challenge. How do we get education, employment, and retention of workforce in a particular economic sector, whether that's higher education, tertiary education, whether that's human health and social care, whether that's local government. The issues are consistent from a labor market framing. And that's what the World Health Organization has been doing for many years now, with partnerships with UNESCO, with OECD, with ILO and others, looking at the labor market of health. And your question, Marco, absolutely similar issues as the education sector. A global shortage projected to 2030 against the ambition of universal health coverage. That's at a global scale, about 11 million health professionals required between now and 2030, a target with the COVID-19 impact and the challenges there, some of the current financial impact, a target that is unlikely to be met in that 15-year period accordingly. Now, those global numbers and global figures we need to approach. It's wonderful for general discussion across governments and agencies, but we need to be explicit as we look into the detail. And it's wonderful to see Brazil and South Africa with us here today. Their role, for instance, in the G20, the current troika for the G20, Brazil in 2024, South Africa this year, and making sure that our government review of some of these issues around that social protection ethos, whether that's from the Lula government or from the South African government, in terms of looking at our social contract to get people into jobs, to get people supporting government services, to extend that to the population. And perhaps just rather than the sort of focusing on the numbers, Marco, which, like I said, lots of similarities in terms of scale of shortage, the distribution issues, just let's look at the labour market challenge, particularly with respect to youth. And just three challenges here that I think would value the conversation. One, the context and the fault for multilateralism. This is youth being challenged at the moment to look at career opportunities, human capital development coming into out of secondary education into tertiary education, potentially into jobs, especially for our professional roles, at a time when health, education, social protection is under complete attack. I have Secretary Gaetani from Brazil, absolutely, this fight for multilateralism is real. And our youth are seeing this and understanding that. And it's where the common narrative is a disincentive to engage with public service. It is already underfunded. It is already under huge challenges coming out of COVID-19 pandemic. And now we're seeing further attacks to deregulate markets, to promote the private sector, to limit labor employment conditions, to go to types of spurious employment contracts, the gig economy, et cetera, let alone the fame economy that is sort of stimulating much more bigger areas around social media and digital issues. So there's this real fight for context, in which case we have to, as governments and agencies, we have to step up our response to counter that narrative. That's the first clear point, and really put forward an issue around the opportunity from public service to come further forward. Secondly, then, that puts upon us all a role of stewardship. And at the government level, this is an intersectoral agenda. If we talk about education, employment, and retention, primarily of youth and women in our sectors, to be in service, providing services, we've got to do that, financing that, making sure that we've got geographical representation and across the economies that we serve, to make sure that therefore we're doing. And it isn't happening, Marco, at the moment. It's not happening there's some small examples, but even after a decade of the SDGs, governments and the UN agencies, including, unfortunately, WHO, work often in silos. We have compete against ourselves. The emphasis on collaboration is just not there. And so as we talk about the fight for multilateralism and then the response to that and the response about how does government be more effective, we have to commit to eliminate duplication, eliminate inefficiencies amongst government agencies, come together. The partners in those sectors must do the same and put a stewardship agenda on the table at the forefront of our work. And that has to be, as much as I'm passionate about the role of public service, it has to be around partnerships for the public purpose. anticipating and including the private sector. And we have to be realistic about this. In health and social services around the world nowadays, 5 out of the 6 regions of the world that WHO looks at, private sector is the biggest employer, not the public sector. So we have to engage the private sector in partnerships for public purpose. Not public-private partnerships for profit, but partnerships between the public and private to hit those policy objectives. Thirdly, then, and the final point really, and this has really been learned from the work with ILO and OECD and others, and the Working for Health program. Dr. Luvuyo Bayeni in South Africa is very familiar with this work. We've been helping him facilitate, or he's been facilitating that discussion with governments. We've been supporting him on that process. We really need intentional investment in this work. And that has to come from, I see in the chat, recognition of both the multilateral development banks, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and many, many others. We have to come back, if there's to intentional investment in this social infrastructure, this human capital. If we are committed to a principle of universal access to education, universal access to health, universal access to sexual and reproductive health services, we have to be committed to invest in the people that deliver that, their decent work agenda, the fundamental rights and principles of work that the ILO promotes, and which all governments and all UN agencies have a responsibility to implement. And we really need to deliver that further forward. And it is through this type of conversation, again, Marco, UNESCO's ILO, bringing governments together, bringing youth and advocates together, bringing civil society. But we need to bring the finance people to the table as well. And we need to get them to understand that public stewardship and public and private provision will enable us to offer youth an attractive role to deliver universal health, universal education. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Jim. And indeed, this is really the aim of this webinar, to kick off this conversation. And we hope that there will be more work about bringing together all those working on the sectors linked to public services for a joint work. Also related to financing of public services. This is what we are doing, for instance, in the domain of education. But as many of you were saying, funding is a real challenge. The reduction of international development assistance doesn't help, but it also calls for looking more at the efficiency of country expenditure for public services, as you just mentioned. And talking about this, I would like to turn to the last speaker of this panel, Peter Ringstad from NORAD. Peter, how can we bring in public finance to pay for salaries, public services? How can we work better in domestic resource mobilization for funding public services?
Thank you, Marco. That's a great question. And first off, as a somewhat outsider to this space, I want to thank you for the invitation. And I hope that I can help bridge the discussion leading up to the World Summit for Social Development with the issues of financing more generally, but the following up of the financing for development process in the UN more specifically. We are in what the International Center for Tax and Development has coined the tax era of development, meaning that aid is retreating, that debt pressures are rising, and this happens just as the need for core services and climate adaptation, among other things, are increasing. So tax is now a linchpin of development finance. It's critical not just for revenues, but for debt sustainability and also for investor confidence to come into countries. As this is a backdrop, it is perhaps my role in this panel to remind ourselves that there is no such thing as free education or free public services. Education costs money, it isn't free, and we need to care about how it will be paid for. And if we believe in universal access, we must build universal financing. It has to be grounded in equitable taxation and robust public finance management. So we know already that tax and domestic resource mobilization is what carry the main load of financing of social sectors. Tax is the most sustainable source of financing over time. And actually most other sources of financing will at some point have to come back and to be underpinned by taxation. For instance, debt-based financing must be paid back at some point, and that means usually revenues from taxes. The IMF is also pointing on having governments have the ability to tax at least 15% of GDP in their countries is correlated with a minimum of core state capabilities that you need in order to create economic growth and also to facilitate investments. So we need that. We know that DRM is sort of the core of financing of social sectors. We also know that when you increase fiscal space, so when you increase government revenues, this correlates with increased government investments in the social sectors. So actually the not just the absolute number of investment, but the relative investments in social sectors increase as governments have more revenues. This means that we need to focus on not just how to tax equitably, not just to have fair tax policies. We need to look at the whole of government sort of chain. Talking about progressivity only makes sense when you look at the societal impact, both from the revenue perspective, but also when you look what happens after the expenditure side has happened, after the spending side. So how can we go forward doing this? So we need to raise revenue equitably. We need to invest in tax administrations, and we need to invest in good tax policies. There's a lot of underutilized tax instruments, such as property taxes that also harmonize very well with other types of reforms that makes a lot of sense for governments to do. But we also need to stop the leakages from governments, both internationally through illicit financial flows and corruption, but also to strengthen procurement systems. So in July, we had the Financing for Development Summit in Sevilla in Spain. This was the first time in 10 years we had such a UN summit. And in the middle of a very difficult climate for multilateralism, the fact that we actually got UN member states together to joint commitment in itself was actually quite a win for global collaboration. The FFD has a very clear commitment to enhance the fiscal space of governments through investments in tax systems and domestic resource mobilization, and to commit governments to increase spending in the social sectors. So I encourage everyone to keep their governments to account to these commitments in the FFD, and to use the World Summit on Social Development to make sure that if you are committed to ensure high quality public sectors, that you also care about how governments are going to finance that, and to follow the money through governments through accountable systems of public finance. So thank you so much, Marco, for inviting me. Thanks.
Thanks, Emilio and Peter. We've now reached the end of this first segment. I'm very pleased to give the floor to Oliver Lieng from the International Labour Organization. Please.
Thank you so much, Marco. And indeed, thank you very much, everyone on panel one. Absolutely fascinating presentations and really frame this topic so well. Maybe just a quick note, we are keeping track of the many comments and questions that are coming in through this webinar. We hope we'll have a chance to at least acknowledge some of these a bit later, but we will move on with the second panel. As we heard in the first panel, there are serious challenges in terms of financing and working conditions and attracting youth into the public sectors. But as the Brazilian Secretary Gaetani said in the outset, it's a devilish circle, because to convince governments to invest more in public sectors and to convince taxpayers, as Peter just mentioned to fund these systems, people have to be convinced that these systems are things that are going to provide them with quality services. They need to be responsive to the needs of people. So the panel that we have next is going to address this question on how we can make public services more responsible to the needs of people, and how in particular investing in the people behind these services, in the education, health, and water systems, can be a strategy for actually improving the quality, relevance, and accessibility of these services. I'll turn to my first panelist, who is Heike Kuhn. She's head of the Education Division at the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany, BMZ. She is, of course, also a longtime had leadership roles in the Transforming Education Summit and the International Teacher Task Force. So Heike, perhaps you can tell us from BMZ's perspective, your agency, your ministry invests heavily in health, education, and water, how you see investing in people is a way to improve these services. Over to you, Heike.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver, and thank you also for having me here, UNESCO, ILO. I think this is really a timely seminar, timely webinar, and I would like to change a little bit my speech because it was so interesting, the first part, and I want to react to some of you. So I will group my my intervention, just 5 points. So point number 1. We, of course, in Germany, always looking towards education. We believe that public services are the backbone of the social contract. This is clear. And we have used, in this country, you really use public education. Somebody spoke it. Told us before, this is also from the development ministry I'm speaking. This is where we are looking towards our partners. We're speaking about public schools. We're not speaking, we don't, sometimes we meet, or I meet in all the meetings, I meet people who went to private schools. This is not what we're speaking about. We have to look towards those people who really need public schools. And this is, I'll come later to this, to the teacher. This is why this is so important. So public services in education are a public good, are infrastructure in a way. And this is good and timely that we speak about this before the World Social Summit. And it's also a big question on equality or inequality. So my second point, what do we do on the people? You asked me this, Oliver. So we have, looking towards the public sector, first of all, of course, you have to finance the public sector. And especially thankful also to the previous speaker from NORAD, to Mr. Ringstad, also mentioning this. Is of course, this is a costly exercise, and who has to pay this? I will later come to the domestic finance, but we try to help from our side, from the development ministry, to have this, but it must be clear, you have to pay for the public services, education, and skills, and vocational training is a driver for responsiveness. So you need also good staff. You need to involve all generation. This was so interesting what has been said before. Young people, what Alan Dixon told us, why young people want to be involved, because they see a sense in the public sector also. This was really interesting to hear this. And also those who are already in, the boomers, or how you want to call them, they also need continuous training and lifelong learning. And also in the public service, you need a lot also of vocational training. You may know that my country, Germany, we are quite strong also in vocational training. My third point is on teachers and educators at the heart of transformation. I serve, Oliver mentioned it, I'm also a co-chair of the UNESCO Teacher Task Force, and it was good to hear also Ms. Giannini speaking to us on the teachers, also very engaged, of course, Education International. Without teachers, the public service will not function. We need teachers also in the system, but also to train those who have to work in the public service. So I can echo what has been said on this. Without teachers and this global shortage in teachers, and it was good to listen also to our colleague from the Philippines, what is going on in the Philippines. We have to invest in these teachers. If not, things will worsen. So how do we do this? We serve together with South Africa. There's someone here, a speaker from South Africa. We serve as co-chairs, and we try to raise our voices. So my next point, number 4, is about partnerships and multilateral cooperation, also as key enabler. This is where we raise our voices, and we try also to look at the money. Where does the money go from the big funds? I'm sitting on the boards of Global Partnership for Education, GPE, and Education Cannot Wait, ECW, and this is also where we raise our voices and I think we come with good arguments why we have to invest in teachers also. So just be assured that this happens, but also I'm speaking as a European country. We also have do a lot of work together with the European Commission, with Team Europe initiatives, also on vocational training. By the way, there is more interest nowadays from partner countries, from Africa, from other countries, to vocational training, and also with UNICEF, of course. And I would also like to come back what a previous speaker has said on the private sector. Also, we try to engage with the private sector wherever possible. And now I would come to my last point, the national ownership and the accountability as a very important precondition. So Mr. Ringstedt spoke about it. First of all, I'm speaking here for a donor country, but financing the schools in an African country is always also, or in every country, also in my country, is the task of the respective government. So what we can do is help, give best practices, learn from those who are very good. For instance, in teaching, in teachers and education, we always learn from Finland, but we have close conversations also via the boards of the institution, especially Global Partnership for Education, with our partner countries. How can we help? How can we how can we support the country to invest in education? I think this is really the important issue to come to the national ownership and domestic finance. This is where we have to go. And then it makes sense for a lot of young people also to invest and dedicate their lives. Being a teacher, if you can rely to have a decent job, if you are listening. And one final point I want to mention also, involve the young people everywhere, wherever this is possible. They have to have a say, as teachers have to have a say, and cannot be far away from decisions taking in a ministry. We have to bring these stakeholders together. I think I will stop here in looking at the time, and because I also want to listen to the other speakers of this panel. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you so much, Heike. It's really great to hear that BMZ recognizes the importance of people behind these public sectors. I do note that the Doha Declaration, which is circulating, fortunately makes a lot of mention of public sectors, but doesn't necessarily mention the workers behind them. So it's really good to see that this is getting wider recognition. I'd like to turn to next panelist, David Boyce, who is Deputy General Secretary of Public Services International. It is a global union federation which represents over 30 million public sector workers. I think it's an important point that the public sector is still the most heavily unionized sector in the world. So unions play an incredibly important role here. David, I'd like to ask you how, in improving the responsiveness of public services, what role can unions play in this? Unions are sometimes perceived as sometimes troublemakers in the sectors as well. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about their important role in improving the quality. Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. First of all, congratulations to the organizers for this meeting. It's the amount of clarity and focus on the major challenges gives hope to building the world we need. And apologies to the interpreters if I and others go too fast. I think we've heard that inequality and lack of hope for the future feed on and exacerbate each other and undermine social development. We also know that universal access to quality public services significantly reduce inequality and give people and families dignity and hope. They're a key element for building and preserving social stability and allowing social development, what the summit's all about. They're also an essential underpinning for a thriving public sector. Yet, universal access to quality public services are and have been under constant attack for decades. Part of it is the assumption that the market can best decide on who gets what and what gets done. And this assumption has reached, even surpassed its limits. Privatization and its latest iteration of financialization have become a toxic tool for increasing inequality and undermining social solidarity. So it's past time to renew the social compact between people and their governments. Priority for us is to ensure that the public services meet the needs of families, communities, and the environment. So, Oliver, what do we need to do? We need to strengthen, not weaken, our democratic institutions. We need to ensure the strong workforce to deliver quality public services because, frankly, without well-trained and equipped workers, no matter how much money or AI, people, families, and communities won't get the services they need. Now, I want to admit up front here in this, a number of PSI sectors are jealous of the big political win in the education sector, where K through 12 is seen as largely free of charge to families. And so congratulations for the years-long work of Education International and UNESCO on this. And I'm a little bit humbled because Ms. Giannini's opening remarks are so in sync with our positions. And clearly there's so many needs that we need to address. But all the needs we see require strong and capable democratic institutions. So, Oliver, what we need to do is develop our political voices so that the needs of workers, families, communities, and the planet have the proper weight in the halls of government, clearly in the legislature where laws are passed, but also in the executive, which implements, and the judiciary, which guards and interprets. And these political priorities must carry at all levels of government, local, national, regional, and global. And we've got to lean in heavily on debt, tax justice, and austerity, areas that we're told are too complicated for normal people to address. Look, public service workers are in every single community. And all of you, as you say, many of them are organized in unions to defend their rights and interests. And what we're working on is public service unions need to reach into their communities. We need to share our perspectives from the workplace, but we also need to listen to the concerns of the communities and to forge deep and long-standing alliances to make our voices heard and to ensure that policies meet our needs. Just one quick comment on the comrade from NORAD in the previous panel. I must admit, as a Canadian, NORAD used to mean the North American Air Defense or whatever, but we have to have country by country reporting by multinational corporations on the profits they earn. It has to be public, and therefore they will then allow governments to tax appropriately. And we've got to end all of the games because clearly taxation is the fundamental financial tool On debt, we've got to join the Jubilee campaign. It's going to be a lot tougher than it was in the year 2000, because now much of the debt is owned by these financial companies who will not make deals, who will not accept a haircut. So look, our work is cut out for us. I think this panel and the previous one, this meeting, has done a fantastic job. So thanks again, and let's work together for the future.
Thanks so much, David, and reminding us of the important democratic voice that unions bring into this whole process, participating not only in reform efforts, but promoting democracy in general. And it's a good point to remember that for many public servants, conventions 87 and 98 of the ILO are still difficult to implement. There are restrictions in many public sectors on exercising freedom of association and collective bargaining. I want to now turn to the private sector. We heard already a few times the important and critical role that the private sector and partnering with the private sector is going to play in providing public services. Adam Cave is the managing director of Murray Mackintosh Water, which is an important company in the UK that recruits and manages water professionals. I was surprised to learn how challenging finding water professionals is in the UK. If I understand our latest report, there are projections of serious shortages of workers in the UK in this area. Adam, what can you tell us about how your company is dealing with these shortages and trying to make the water sector more responsive to the needs of UK citizens?
Sure. Thank you, Oliver. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. And thank you to UNESCO and the ILO for the opportunity to speak today. I think Oliver's just given me a great intro there. I would expand on that to say we are a recruitment and search firm that focuses largely on the water and utilities industries across engineering, commercial, technical skill sets, but also a large focus of our work is on the policy, advocacy and strategic comms elements that we experience in the sector. As Oliver mentioned, I've been asked to kind of talk about some of the current trends that we're seeing in our sectors and try and drag some thoughts through to scalable, resilient workforce strategies in public services, particularly in water and sanitation. I put a one-page slide together, which may be floating around on your screens somewhere. You'll note the sources, and I'm happy to provide these following the meeting. They're useful reference points to the information I'm about to give, but generally when you're looking at certainly the UK sector, but also there's some useful stats in there with regards to the wider European and global sense. So if I start with the context and the challenge, the water and sanitation sector is facing a dual workforce crisis. There's one immediate and the other is long term. Right now, we're in the middle of what we've described in our water labour report as a perfect storm. So some of the key information points that we've drawn out of that report are that nearly half of engineers in the UK cite skill shortages as the sector's biggest threat. 2/3 are actively seeking roles in other industries, including renewables and nuclear power. And almost a quarter plan to retire within 5 years, creating a retirement cliff that threatens delivery of the UK water company's current 5-year plans and obviously the long-term resilience that we would hope to see from the sector. We know, however, through our association with Aquafed, that these are not just UK, but they are global trends. This isn't just about numbers, it's about misalignment. Engineers lack access to relevant training. They feel unable to innovate and are often frustrated by rigid management structures. Only 61% of these engineers believe that their workforce is fit for the future, and nearly half say the education system isn't preparing young people adequately. On top of this, I would highlight that for the generations coming through into the workforce, career expectations have changed. Young professionals are looking for flexibility, purpose, and mobility across sectors like climate, health, infrastructure. But many organizations, certainly ones that we work with in our territories of focus, still operate as if it's the 1990s. There is a focus on permanent hiring, siloed roles, and long linear career paths. we need to acknowledge this generational shift. The workforce of the future won't be built on legacy models. It will be built on agility, inclusion, and purpose. So what are the solutions we have here? I guess firstly, I would suggest we unlock agility. We need to better utilize a contingent workforce, contractors, consultants, interims, and specialists who bring flexibility and deep expertise. These professionals are often under-leveraged and underutilized due to outdated hiring models and regulatory fears. We should open the door to talent from other infrastructure sectors. Skills exist in all of these that are more than transferable, and we must stop treating water as a closed ecosystem. In the UK, we have seen some small steps towards cross-sector mobility, which has reduced onboarding time, improved resilience, and lowered costs, but so much more could be done. The second solution is how we go about building a future-ready workforce, so a slightly longer-term strategy here. This ultimately means moving away from rigid, permanent hiring strategies that belong, as I said, in the 1990s, and embrace models that reflect how people want to work today. So from our experience, we see that young professionals expect purpose-driven roles aligned with community and climate impact, flexible career paths that allow movement across disciplines, opportunities to learn from experienced mentors, not just formal training. The so-called retirement cliff that I mentioned should be treated as an opportunity. In the UK, I'd highlight Anglian Water as an organisation that has adopted quite an innovative strategy and ways around their retirement cliff and the volume of staff they have on the edge of retirement by utilising it through a proactive retirement strategy that includes incentivising 6-month notice periods, using the time in that notice period for structured handovers and mentoring, and embedding knowledge transfer into their daily operations. With 90% of their retirees opting in, they're turning risk into resilience, preserving decades of institutional knowledge, and creating a bridge between generations. It's, in our experience, a relatively isolated example, and we definitely need a more cohesive sector-wide approach to talent, one that treats skills, training, attraction, and retention as shared priorities, not competitive advantages. These seminars, I think, serve as a reminder that public services exist to serve people. Everything we've discussed today comes down to communication, advocacy, and education. We must connect our workforce strategies to education so that young people understand the pathways available to them. We must connect our delivery plans to communication strategies so stakeholders and communities know what's coming and why it matters. And we must advocate for our sector so that the public understands the services they rely on and feels empowered to contribute to them. Thank you. I'll throw it back to you, Oliver.
Thanks so much, Adam, for that really fascinating look at a very particular workforce and some very interesting ideas there. I think we can have a whole webinar down the road about how to reconcile, this where there seems a lot of consensus about skills building and the need for investing, but at the same time, this idea of a contingent workforce, which of course is also challenging for youth and for certain social benefits and so forth and so on. So these are definitely challenges labor challenges that we'll have to deal with. Adam, you mentioned, that at the end of the day, this is about services that serve people. And I want to turn to our next speaker, Omar El-Hattab, who is the Senior WASH Advisor at UNICEF. UNICEF, of course, is all about the children and is about people who really need these services. Children are especially vulnerable if health, education, and water services are failing. From UNICEF's perspective, what do you see as the most important challenges in improving public services? I guess you will focus on the water sector. And maybe you can give us your perspective on also where the workers and the people in those sectors play a role. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Oliver, and a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. And first of all, we take the opportunity to thank UNESCO and ILO for inviting us. Well, similar to all sectors, the sanitation sector, I'm going to focus on the sanitation now that Adam has covered partially the water in the UK, is quite complex. The sanitation sector is quite complex. It includes service providers, regulatory functions, and users. And even the service providers include the official service providers, the private sector, user managed systems, and so forth. However, beyond functions, services, infrastructure, and so forth, the sector is meant to provide a service to children and their communities. And children and their communities are not really concerned about what all the sector entails. They just need quality services. So first of all, let me try and examine the sector's ability to respond to the needs of children and their communities. The chart on the top right left-hand side, the chart on the top left-hand side of the slide gives the responsiveness of the sanitation sector to the needs of children and their communities. Surprisingly, the picture is worse than what we might have thought. It's even more surprising to realize that responsiveness in Asia is the best compared to Latin America being the worst. Surprisingly more it is to realize that responsiveness in Africa and the developed regions are on par. Well, it's all about expectations. And of course, objectivity may be questionable. But however, the chart does say something. The chart says we have a problem here. Children and their communities are rights holders, and the sanitation service
I'm afraid we can't hear you, Omar. Seem to have lost Omar. Omar is coming from Nairobi, if I understand. So we'll give him just a few. Okay, while we wait for Omar to reconnect, I think we can look at his slide, and I think he's already shown us a fairly sobering picture about where the water sector stands. Maybe I'll turn to our next speaker, and we'll get back to Omar when he's reconnected. I'll turn to you, Ms. Nelsie Lizarrazo, who's General Coordinator of the Latin American Campaign for the Right to Education, CLADE, which is, of course, an important partner for UNESCO, and I believe in ILO we work with you as well. Can you tell us a little bit about, from your point of view, as someone who has been campaigning for quality education and access to education, about how quality matters and how workers in these sectors are important for quality? Over to you.
Thank you, Olivier. Hello, everybody, and thank you for this invitation. In fact, I'm not going to speak about just education. I'm going to speak about public services, because education and public systems of education are a public service, and our fight is about strengthening the public systems of education. Just to emphasize and to add some probably new reflections to all of this interesting dialogue, I have to say that public service, from our perspective, are an indispensable tool for states to fulfill their obligation to guarantee the rights of all their citizens. Therefore, the entire public service system in each country must be designed from a rights-based approach. This is for us very, very important. We know that austerity and the lack of sustainable public financing, together with market trends toward privatization, have an impact on the chronic lack of financing for public service. We know data, we know how is the situation, we have many information about this, and I think that we have to emphasize what are the structural reasons behind this situation. And I just going to point three structural reasons. The debt, that, as you know, has serious consequences for the economy and public investment in our countries, in the global south especially, but not only. Taxes, because in the global south especially, are highly regressive and a globalized financial architecture that favors inequalities and inequities, as we know. So the question is, what kind of public education or health or water system do we need to guarantee the full exercise of each of these rights for everyone in a national territory? So we think that we need a public service where our rights are guaranteed, not based on our ability to pay or whether a system produces profit, but on whether it enables all of us to live well together in peace and equality. Who owns our resources and our services is fundamental. A public future means ensuring that everything essential to dignified lives is out of private control and under the colonial forms of collective, transparent, and democratic control. In some contexts, this means decisive local, regional, or national interventions by the state. In other contexts, this means strengthening people's organizations, including trade unions, and expanding spaces of self-government, commons, collective, and community control of resources. The public future will not be possible, from our perspective, without taking bold collective national action for ambitious, gender transformative, and progressive fiscal and economic reforms to massively expand financing of universal public service. These reforms must be complemented by major shifts in the international public finance architecture, including transformations in tax, debt, and trade governance.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, those are very key points. We clearly, debt and then also dealing with the colonial legacy are going to be key issues that face all of these public services to some degree. And it's something that we haven't thought about enough. I want to see if we can get back to Omar. Omar, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Apologies, the connection is quite unstable, so I apologize for that. If Oliver, if you don't mind, if you can project the slide and I'll pick up from where I hope I had. I think it's the following slide. Yes, there we go.
Yeah, I think you gave a good, we got an idea of the engagement rate and the responsiveness perceptions, but perhaps you want to talk a little bit about, yeah, go ahead.
Of course. Yeah, the sanitation sector can respond to the needs of children and their communities more effectively by aligning its strategies to equity, sustainability, resilience, and participation, as given in the infograph on the top right hand of the slide. And this can be advanced through a myriad of strategies, including understanding people's needs, improving access and equity, strengthening systems and institutions, climate and environmental resilience, innovation and technology, and finally, global advocacy, global collaboration and advocacy. But for all of this to happen, we need to have people. We need to have a strong and capable workforce. And the sanitation sector workforce is confronted by so many challenges, as Dave has alluded previously. The chart on the bottom right-hand side of the slide gives the sanitation sector workforce retention rates. You may notice that Africa is far off compared to the rest of the regions and certainly the developed regions. Workforce recruitment and retention challenges in the sector are widespread and multifaceted. And key among these are the aging workforce, skills mismatch, negative perception of the sector, barriers for youth and women, limited investment in HR development, and mismatch between education and workforce needs. However, there are means and ways to address these challenges. And among these are education and training reform, youth engagement and mentorship, inclusive recruitment and retention, strategic partnerships, digital transformation, and public awareness and branding. Not different from other sectors, the aging workforce is a major challenge. And unless we manage to engage young professionals, the sector will eventually stumble. The chart on the bottom left-hand side of the slide gives the retention rates of the young professionals in the sector. You may notice that the entire world isn't doing well in this area. While Asia and the Pacific are doing a bit better than the rest of the world, the overall picture is not good. It's really bad. Recruiting young professionals into the sanitation sector faces persistent and complex challenges globally, including limited awareness and visibility, mismatch between education and sector needs, lack of structured career pathways, low compensation and job security, barriers to entry, and finally, underrepresentation and inequity. However, again, there are means and ways to address this, but yet we need a concerted and a focused effort. Among the means, early engagement and education, internships, apprenticeships and mentorship, purpose-driven branding, digital and innovative recruitment, inclusive and supportive workplaces, entrepreneurship and innovation challenges, and finally, career development and recognition. In conclusion, the key takeaways here. Sanitation is a critical sector for meeting the human rights of children and their communities. The sector can respond to the needs of children and their communities more effectively by aligning strategies with equity, sustainability, resilience, and participation. Addressing recruitment challenges is critical for sustainable sanitation services. Strategic investment in HR, education, and public engagement are critical. Finally, collaboration across sectors will strengthen workforce capacity and resilience. Thank you for your attention, and the floor is back over to you, Oliver.
Thank you so much, Omar. And your connection was great, so we really got your intervention. Yeah, again, thanks for reminding us the critical importance of access of these services to children, especially who are the most vulnerable. We are slowly drawing to the end of this webinar. Let me just say, the first big conclusion I take is that I don't think this is the end of this conversation. I think this has opened up so many interesting avenues. I do want to indicate that we have been diligently monitoring the chat and the Q&A section. Delighted to see a lot of great questions coming in. We do not have time to now individually answer these. I know that some of the moderators have been answering as they can, some of them individually in the chat. We've noted, and I was delighted that David Archer is here from ActionAid, asking very tough and important questions about how do we get this narrative across to institutions like the IMF, who are indeed putting restrictions on public sector spending. Some very important youth voices coming in saying this all sounds great, but we know that public services are sometimes closed shops. They're captured by certain political parties or certain political directions. It's very hard to break into these careers that are not flexible, where there are tenured career paths of people who sit on jobs forever. So that again brings in this question about do we need more flexibility in the career paths of public sectors. These are really, really important questions. We will not solve those today, but certainly my takeaway is that we will need to further occasions to discuss these. So I want to thank everybody on the panel. This was an absolutely fascinating discussion. And with that, I'd like to turn over to my colleague Yukiko Arai from the Sectoral Policies Department here at the ILO, who has the unenviable job of trying to say a few summarizing words about this event today. Over to you, Yuki.
Thanks very much, Oliver, and thanks very much to all participants, panelists, very stimulating panel. Indeed, I think this is a kickoff of a longer-term discussion and engagement, but allow me to first thank UNESCO team and ADG Stefania Giannini for hosting this webinar, which is really great, important for the ILO. And we also enjoy and appreciate the continued collaboration with UNESCO team, as well as WHO Jim Campbell and his team, UNICEF, and our social partners, including EI and PSI present today. Dear participants, I think we meet today in the time of really profound global transformation and transition, as we heard, transitions in plural perhaps. And across societies, there's a growing sense that social contract, which binds people and the institutions, is under strain. Many are feeling that the system meant to protect and empower them are no longer working as they should, inequalities widening, opportunities shrinking, and trust in public institution is eroding. And yet, amid this uncertainty, we have also witnessed something hopeful, a powerful, renewed call from the people everywhere for a stronger and fairer public services that deliver and delivered with dignity, opportunity, and justice for all. I think today's discussion has really reminded us that the public services are not just technical services and systems, but they are the very foundation of social cohesion, human rights, and decent work. They are what makes societies fairer, economies more productive, and democracies more resilient. As highlighted in the ILO's recent flagship report, you might have seen, we launched the Status of Social Justice report just recently. Persistence inequalities in access to quality education, effective healthcare, and adequate nutrition continues to constrain productive capacity and weaken progress towards attainment of social justice through decent work. People are really demanding quality public services, understanding that such services are essential to the rule of law and the functioning of education health system, democratic institutions, and for creating an enabling environment that advances social development. As we heard in the beginning, I think ADG Stefania has said in her opening that people want public institutions that truly serve them. And I really hear that very loud and clear. But despite these urgent needs, public spending on education, health, as we heard, as a share of GDP is on a decline since COVID-19 pandemic. Private investment may be increasing. That was also encouraging. Jobs are being generated in some corners, but these sectors remain overwhelmingly dependent on public financing. And at the same time, many of the workers who make these services possible face significant decent work deficits. Wages in public education and health remain below those of the workers in professions that require the similar level of qualifications. Many public service sectors face increasing violence and harassment, long hours of work, and psychosocial challenges such as burnout and stress. In water and sanitation sectors, which we also discussed today, lots of informality and occupational safety risks remain very high. Gender disparities, we could have talked a bit more about that today, are notable across the three sectors we focused on today. So just when societies most need quality public services, these services are under intense strain. These services, in my view, are in crisis. The impacts are visible. As we have been reminded, there are projected severe shortfalls of workers in all three of these critical public sectors, and millions of people are affected through lack of access to quality education, health, and sanitation services. But this period of disruption, in my view, can also be a moment of renewal, to renew our commitment. I think we're very passionate about moving forward in a coherent manner to our commitment to public services and the attainment of SDGs and the human rights they underpin. The recent Sevilla commitment adopted at the 4th International Conferencing on Financing for Development offers a clear path forward in this regard. It calls for scaling up of domestic and international investment in health, education, and sanitation infrastructure. It emphasizes that these public services are foundational to achieving sustainable equitable development. These are not costs to be minimized, but investment in people, in equality, and in stability. It urges governments to adopt whole-of-government approaches to taxation and budgeting aligned with the SDGs to strengthen transparency and anti-corruption efforts, and to integrate also the social protection financing into national strategies. And these are essential building blocks for rebuilding both systems and trust. I'd like to note here that last year, the ILO noted that we witnessed for the first time in history that more than half of the world's population are covered by some form of a social protection. Yet this is, welcome progress, but the stark reality is that 3.8 billion people are still entirely unprotected. So today we have also heard important messages about people, especially young people, and they are our future, as we know. So we are to renew public services. We must allow also to renew the public service workforce. This calls for ensuring that careers in education, health, sanitation are attractive, respected, and well supported. Again, as ADG Janani has mentioned, we need to invest in the realm of education, especially invest in teachers, investing in people and yield decent work. The centrality of teachers and the teaching profession was echoed by Ms. Kuhn of BMZ. There's a global shortage of teachers, as Ms. Wolf of Education International has also reminded us. So this really calls for a provision of opportunities for skills development, lifelong learning in public sector jobs. It means also engaging young people as change makers. As Mr. Bayeni said, we also need to hunt for talent, do a talent search and guide their careers. Their voices must be heard. And it means, for us, ILO especially, we want to spearhead ensuring that social dialogue and collective bargaining help shape the policies and the democratic institutions that affect work. So my key message here before closing from an ILO perspective is that reinforcing social dialogue and respect for international labor standard is one of the key strategies for uplifting the conditions for workers in all the public sectors. And here I'd like to thank Jim Campbell from WHO, who brought up and emphasized the importance of respecting, promoting, and realizing the fundamental principles and rights at work for all workers, including those engaged in the public sectors and in all the 187 ILO member states. So in this respect, it is our hope that the ILO's Global Coalition on Social Justice can be a platform and a broad social alliance that spearhead advanced decent work in the public sector. Because decent work for public services workers is not just a labor issue, it's a development imperative. Quality jobs create quality services, and quality services build trust, the much needed trust in social justice. So, as we heard, another key message today was that there can not be SDGs, attainment of SDGs, without people, workers and employers to implement them. Public services are where the social contract meets the daily life. Ms. Kuhn of BMZ stressed the centrality of the public services in social contract and the workers who deliver these important services. When a teacher inspires a child, when a nurse saves a life, when a community gains access to clean water, that is where people see their societies care, that fairness is possible, and that government can work for them. Now, 5 years left to achieve collectively the 2030 agenda. And as we look ahead to the Doha Second World Social Summit for the Second World Summit for Social Development next month, we have a real opportunity to reset course, to place investment in public services and public service workers at the center of a renewed global commitment to social justice. The ILO stands ready to continue working with governments, employers, and workers and partners across the international community to make that vision a reality. I think we are part of the momentum to reconstruct the multilateralism and the multilateral action today. I hope we, together with our sister agencies and partners, can take this message to Doha and beyond. Dear participants, let us empower the public to maximize the power of the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yukiko. Thank you so much for successfully and succinctly summarizing all the very rich and interesting interventions we had today, this afternoon. I would like to, on behalf of our Assistant Director General, Stefania Giannini, I would like to really thank everybody who joined us today. as participants and listeners, and putting in so many interesting comments and questions that we're so sorry we're not able to address to. But I know there have been offers by the speakers to also respond to them directly. So we will share a summary of all the questions with all our speakers, and maybe we will kind of try to do a summary of all this and put it up also on the website for this event, so that you can come back in and read up on what was discussed and maybe the responses that we will be getting for you from the speakers. We hope, as I think Oliver has also mentioned, and as did Yukiko, that this is probably also the start of many other conversations that we should be having, and we look forward to doing that. I think it was really the first time that we were able to come together cross-sectorally to do something like this, and I think it was so rich, and not only rich and interesting, but also really, really helpful and useful to understand also that the fact that we share similar challenges. And we should be getting more often together to get our voices stronger together. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, a special thanks to all the speakers. And I'll also like to thank Oliver and Marco, who really has spent weeks in making sure that we got the best speakers as we did through all of you for this webinar today. So thank you all, and I wish you a very good rest of the afternoon or rest of the day for those who are starting the day. And good night to those who are joining us from the other side of the world where the sun is already setting, has already gone down. So thank you all. And we hope to see you again soon on another similar event that we will organize. And perhaps some of you will be seeing you in Doha. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Congrats. Thanks very much. Congratulations.